tragedy leading to fear.
As teachers, we are afraid to be in our schools and that it is not fair for us.
And bringing out tensions.
How dare you? You think we don't have hearts?
As lawmakers take the first steps, drafting policy with the power to prevent future mass shootings. But criticism mounts that Texas lawmakers are not acting quickly enough on guns.
The governor would prefer that we look at doors, look at mental health, look at anything else to keep our eyes off the real issue, which is guns in the hands of the wrong people.
The response after Governor Greg Abbott directs special committees to be formed instead of calling a special session.
I think what everybody's realizing is we definitely need this transparency in Uvalde.
We look at the efforts to overturn a Texas law that some have said keeps families from getting the truth, how the dead suspect loophole could affect the Uvalde investigation, and what lawmakers plan to do about it in the next legislative session.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. Lawmakers in Texas and Washington, D.C. are attempting to move beyond thoughts and prayers following the mass shooting that killed 19 children and 2 teachers in Uvalde, as they begin to negotiate and put pen to paper when it comes to preventing the next one. Governor Greg Abbott is resisting calls from some Texans to declare a special session. Instead, this week he directed the House and Senate to form committees on school safety, mental health, social media, police training, and firearm safety. Some lawmakers say they're already doing work like that in the interim and say the governor needs to do more to make a difference now. Monica Madden takes a closer look.
With the pain still raw and funerals underway in Uvalde, some lawmakers say now is the time to work for change.
The governor can take action. Act. Call us back. Let us debate. Let us pass legislation.
House Representative Ann Johnson vice chairs a committee that has already been discussing things like mental health and talked about Uvalde in a hearing last Thursday.
The tragedy in Uvalde, although it's not on our agenda today, is tied to the work of this committee as we work on ways to improve mental health resources and outcomes.
It's why she says new committees are not sufficient.
We know the solutions. This is not new.
In a statement, Speaker of the House Dade Phelan noted the investigation into what happened in Uvalde isn't done, saying committees will let lawmakers take a well-informed and comprehensive approach in response. Lawmakers took a similar approach before, after a 17-year-old killed 10 people at a Santa Fe school in 2018. Abbott called for a series of roundtables with extensive school safety recommendations. Lawmakers also passed more than a dozen bills, including measures to expand mental health resources and requiring schools to make threat assessment teams. But questions over why the Uvalde gunman's social media messages and posts were not flagged sooner is leading to more demands to address gun policy.
I don't want the creation of another sham committee. Let us discuss common sense gun reform.
Monica Madden for State of Texas.
2 Republican lawmakers had earlier voiced support for bringing lawmakers back to the Capitol. State Representative Jeff Leach showed support for a special session in a Twitter post after the shootings, but on Wednesday, he thanked the governor for calling instead for new interim committees. That leaves State Senator Kel Seliger as the only Republican to still be advocating for a special session to address gun violence. It's worth noting that Seliger is not running for re-election. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick named 11 senators to serve on the special legislative committee in response to the Uvalde shootings, and Uvalde's state senator is not among them. In a news conference, Democratic Senator Roland Gutierrez called being left off a slap in the face. He again called for a full special session. Gutierrez interrupted one of Governor Abbott's news conferences after the shooting with the same request. The Senate committee also omitted Democrat Cesar Blanco, the state senator representing El Paso. The House committee, on the other hand, did include representatives from communities affected by mass shootings in the past few years in Texas. While Texas lawmakers seem to be waiting until next year to act, it could be a different story in Washington. President Biden on Thursday night delivered a message to Americans.
My fellow Americans, enough. Enough. It's time for each of us to do our part. It's time to act for the children we've lost, the children we can save, for the nation we love. Let's hear the call and the cry. Let's meet the moment. Let us finally do something.
The president's call for action comes as lawmakers on Capitol Hill work on several pieces of legislation related to guns. Democrats in the House pushed forward a package of bills called the Protecting Our Kids Act. It's focused on gun control. As you'd expect, committee debate over the bills turned heated and partisan, and in light of Uvalde, Texans on both sides played a part in the fight. Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia read the names of the shooting victims in Uvalde, then spoke about the failure of leadership to stop gun violence.
One young man pulled the trigger, but we all have failed them. America has failed them, and the other thousands of children that have died as a result of gun violence. Republicans are complicit in Uvalde's negligence and neglect to responsibly address comprehensive gun reform.
You heard Garcia put blame on Republicans for not taking action to prevent gun deaths. Other Democrats echoed those thoughts. It led Republicans like Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert to fire back with accusations about policies backed by Democrats.
How dare you? You think we don't have hearts? It's just that when we look at the things that you're doing and you're trying to do to America, we've seen the carnage.
While the partisan divide in the House plays out in public, senators are taking a slightly different approach. A small group of Democrats and Republicans is working privately to build a framework of gun legislation that could earn bipartisan support. They've reported progress, but similar efforts after previous mass shootings have failed. For years, our investigators have explored Texas law enforcement's widespread use of an open records measure known as the dead suspect loophole. Lawmakers have repeatedly sought to close the loophole, which allows police to withhold information in closed criminal cases that don't go through the court process, even when a suspect dies in police custody. After the Uvalde school shooting and the gunman's death, some transparency advocates, even the Texas House Speaker, worry police may try to use the loophole to keep important details about what really happened from the public, even victims' families. Investigator Matt Grant is pressing state lawmakers on what it would take to close that loophole in the next legislative session. We do want to warn you that you may find some of the video in this story disturbing.
Outside the entrance to the Texas State Capitol,
It's so sad.
a growing memorial lining the steps, the faces of fourth graders murdered in Uvalde.
I hope that these families and the community of Uvalde get the transparency that they need and deserve.
Kelly Shannon says the families deserve answers and accountability, especially giving shifting explanations from law enforcement.
I think what everybody's realizing is we definitely need this transparency in Uvalde.
Shannon is executive director of the Freedom of Information Foundation of Texas. She worries the so-called dead suspect loophole could be used to block the release of records.
We've had all kinds of families come to the Capitol and explain how they could not get simple, basic police records because their loved ones died in police custody.
The loophole was used to keep records related to Javier Ambler's 2019 death in the custody of Williamson County Sheriff's deputies secret for 15 months.
I just gave another round of epi.
The family of 21-year-old Herman Titus, who died at the Travis County Jail in 2017, struggled for years to get information about how he died.
These records belong to the public. Government transparency is government transparency, even when it's not pretty.
In the last 3 legislative sessions, Democratic State Representative Joe Moody of El Paso filed bills to close the loophole. Those efforts failed. He says the original intent of the exception to the Public Information Act, put in place in 1997, was to protect people under investigation. Police unions across the state have fought changes to the law.
This situation, I think, crystallizes why we need to close this loophole, right? This shouldn't even be an option.
Moody plans to file different versions of this bill next session.
There are a lot of questions that have to be answered in that community.
The revived idea to close the loophole getting public support from Republican Speaker of the House Dade Phelan, who backed a similar measure in 2019, calling it common sense. Phelan writing this week, more than anything, the families of the Uvalde victims need honest answers and transparency, period. It would be absolutely unconscionable to use the dead suspect loophole to thwart the release of information that is so badly needed and deserved right now. I think it's time we pass legislation to end the dead suspect loophole for good in 2023. And Josh, we also heard from State Representative Eddie Morales, the Democrat from Eagle Pass, has vowed to close this loophole, including the possibility of legislation.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. And we mentioned our investigators have been exploring the dead suspect loophole and its impact on the public since 2018. You can find more online now in the Texas Politics section of our website. We have a link to this story, to our Denied project, including stories from families who've battled the law, and how our own investigative team has worked to expose its widespread use by police across Texas. The mass shooting in Uvalde sparks a new push to protect Texas students, the new task for schools to make sure campus safety is up to standards. Our investigation found why it can be difficult to get details about the doctors treating animals in Texas, what's changed after our reports, and how it could improve the system. A Texas law passed 2 years ago aims to help families find information about missing loved ones, its successes, and what advocates say still needs to be done.